The Blob, 1988 movie review. So I'm going to date myself here, but I was 10 years old when this movie was in theaters. I was in 5th grade, and I was not allowed to see it, but I was fascinated by it. I remember seeing the commercials for this movie on television. I remember people talking about it in the school playground, and it just fascinated me, or kind of scared me, or horrified me in the way that kids like to be scared. This idea of this huge blob which could just cover you and then dissolve you and eat you whole. I just thought that was the creepiest thing ever. And remained fascinated by it for years afterwards, even though I never got around to seeing the movie. But I was able to track down some other things related to it. I read at one point the short story The Slime by, what was his name? Joseph Payne Brennan, I believe it was. Which is arguably what the movie was based on, although they changed the name for some sort of legal reasons, I think, to avoid having to pay him the rights for it. And of course, the Blob 1988 was a remake of the 1958 movie, which I saw at some point when I was a teenager. It was being rerun on cable. This video is not going to be primarily a review of the 1958 version, other than just to say, 1958 version is really interesting. I mean, if you haven't seen it, you should. You should if you like that kind of thing. I mean, it's kind of it's an old movie, it's a cheesy 1950s movie. So if you go in for that kind of thing, if you like that cheesy kind of retro, kind of old style stuff, it's definitely interesting. It's worth checking out. It's got elements of a horror movie in it, but it's also really campy. And it's kind of a 1950s teen movie as well. It's got all these teenagers, and the adults just don't understand them. And I think there's even a scene where they're police officers, and one of them just really hates teenagers for some irrational reason. Steve McQueen was in his film debut in this movie. He was looking this up on Wikipedia. He was 28 at the time, but he's playing a teenager. Hollywood always does this. And there's a whole gang of teenagers in the drugstore and in the movie, and it's kind of a classic piece of American culture. Not really scary at all, but worth seeing just for, well, it's just a classic piece of pop culture. Anyways, I kind of lost interest in it. Years went by, but saw the other day a Cinemassacre video comparing the 1958 Blob to the 1988 Blob, and then I remembered, oh yeah, I never got around to seeing that 1988 version, which I was so fascinated by as a child. So I tracked down a copy online, and here I am with my review. Yeah, it's entertaining. It seems at face value to suffer from lazy writing. But at the same time, the movie is also seeming to be a bit of a parody of itself. So it's difficult to know how hard to be on it. For example, there's a scene with a couple teenagers, and they got their car parked up on a hill overlooking the city at makeout point, and they're making out in the car all alone, and the guy is moving a little bit fast, and the girl is saying no, she's resisting his advances, and then all of a sudden the monster attacks them, and you think, well, this is the most obvious horror cliche in like all of horror movies, but then maybe that's the point. Maybe they're deliberately making fun of that cliche. Is it like a tongue-in-cheek tribute to the genre, or is it lazy writing? I wasn't able to quite piece that one out, although I'm leaning towards the scene being tongue-in-cheek. The other thing I thought was, I don't know, either lazy or was maybe tongue-in-cheek, is that the Blob just does a remarkable job of appearing only at times that are convenient to the plot, and then disappearing again by the same logic. We're told explicitly that it's, or we're shown that it's an insatiable eating machine, just absorbing everything living that it can get its hands on. It's blobs on. But then there's a scene where the heroine faints right in front of the Blob, and the Blob just crawls off without touching her at all. And it's never explained, I mean, other than the obvious explanation that this is what was convenient for the plot, to keep this heroine alive. And I thought, well, that's really lazy writing, or maybe that also is meant to be like a tongue-in-cheek parody of, you know, the way horror movies often have these contrivances and conveniences of plot. I don't know. But then there's another scene. So, if you haven't seen the movie yet, or even if you have, maybe you're familiar with this story. There's an old story. Sometimes it shows up as an urban legend. You know, like somebody will report it as like a true story that happened to a friend of a friend or something they've heard. It's either a popular urban legend or sometimes it's just told as a straight up joke. But the popular story is guy's going to let me start over. Guy has a date with a girl. He's really nervous about it. He doesn't know whether or not he should bring a condom with him just to be safe or not. So he goes to the drugstore, buys a condom. He's a little bit nervous, so he kind of is joking around with the drugstore clerk a little bit about, oh, I don't know, maybe I'll get lucky tonight or something like that. Then he goes to the house to pick the girl up that night, and the father opens the door. And it turns out the father is a drugstore clerk that he was making the nervous banter with earlier about buying the condom. So that scene shows up in this movie. And, you know, it's played for comedy, as you can imagine. But I thought, okay, well now even the comedy is just recycling cliches. Like, I could understand it if the horror parts of it, they were parodying the genre of horror movies. But even the comic relief scenes here are just recycling cliches. And at that point, I stopped giving the movie the benefit of the doubt and thought maybe the writing is just really lazy. Although I don't know, is that the whole point? I don't know. I mean, let me know what you think. Is the whole point of this movie that they're just recycling cliches, and is that the whole joke? Or are they just recycling cliches because they're lazy? I couldn't figure it out. Let me know what you think. I say I couldn't figure it out, but I was leaning towards the side of thinking that they were lazy. Okay, so on the plus side, the special effects in this movie are much improved since the 1958 version. 1958 version, you never actually saw the Blob eat anyone. You know, you just see the Blob move close to them, and then there would be a scream, and then it would, you know, the camera angle would change, and they'd always get eaten off screen. Here, there's a couple horrifying scenes where the Blob like drops on somebody, and you can see like somebody's horrified face underneath the Blob trying to scream or yell for help, but just being smothered by the Blob as they're slowly being dissolved by it, which is, yeah, quite a horrifying image, and I mean that in a good way because this is a scary movie, or supposed to be. What's interesting though, well, the Blob doesn't eat people whole. It just kind of half devours them and then leaves their half-eaten bodies there, which I think was just a way to get more gore into this movie. You know, it was the 1980s. I guess that was the thing, having these gore scenes in your horror movies. If I was a little bit younger and more squeamish, this would have bothered me. I'm older and jaded now, so I just thought, yeah, okay. you know, and it's 1980, so it's pretty old effects and stuff like that. It didn't really gross me out per se. It's at this point doesn't compare with other stuff I've seen on screen, but it did seem kind of pointless. I mean, because the whole point of the Blob in like the original Slime story and in the 1958 version, it just absorbed everything whole. I mean, that was the whole point, right? It was just an insatiable eating machine. Here, it just, I mean, what's the point of it half eating people? I mean, I know the point is because they wanted to put some more gore in the movie, but I mean, what's the in-universe logic for it? It didn't seem to make any sense to me. Okay, also to give credit where credit is due, there's a couple clever misdirects early on in this movie, where, spoiler alert by the way, there are some characters and you think that these are going to be the main characters, like the movie is setting them up as if they're the main characters, and all of a sudden they get eaten by the Blob. And then like you're following the secondary characters who then become the main characters after that. So that I thought was clever, the way that was set up. Yeah. All in all, it was an entertaining movie. It held my attention for the whole time I was watching it. I did feel though that I had to turn off that critical part of my brain while I was watching it. The part of my brain that was says, well, that doesn't make sense. Why is the Blob doing that? You've got to turn off that part of your brain. But just in terms of pure entertainment value, yeah, it was all right. I guess I would sort of recommend it if you haven't seen it.